I'm Chip Hanna, and this is the For You Leaders podcast featuring Kirk Dando, where we truly go beyond the veneer. You'll experience the raw and the real of leadership. You'll see your feet not miles away from the top. Would it be surprising if your waiter knew more about finance than you? Would you take a bet that the busser knew how their actions contributed to the company's EBITA? Listen to Mason Ayer, CEO of Kirby Lane Cafe.
They might be bussing tables. They also understand how their actions and the actions of the team members around them drive and impact the P&L and how that flows to EBITDA. And ultimately, our team is aligned around an EBITDA goal because we have a profit share that's in place.
Kirk, did you ever work in a restaurant?
Yeah. I actually worked at Taco Bell. I was there for all of 2 weeks and figured I'm going to go work construction. I think I might like it better.
That's pretty crazy. So I worked in restaurants to help put myself through school. And most of the time, I was just lucky if the busser could remember to leave the tip on the table. That was a victory in my world.
All right. Well, I'm glad I didn't know you in high school then, Chip. Those are big victories. But today's guest is the CEO of Kirby Lane, Mason Ayer. And Kirby Lane is iconic in the Austin area. And if you've ever been in the area, I'm sure you've heard of it. Mason runs his restaurant very differently, and I had the chance to talk with Mason and hear his story. Let's listen in as Mason discusses how he's turned Kirby Lane into more than just a restaurant. He's really turned it into a place for people to grow and to thrive.
So I grew up in Austin, Texas. In fact, in a lot of ways, I grew up in the restaurants in the sense that it's a family business, and from the time I was a little kid, I have memories of bussing tables and washing dishes and sometimes doing things that are even less glamorous, like using a paint scraper to scrape bubble gum off the bottoms of tables. So I've been in and around the restaurants my whole life, but I never really thought that was going to be my path. I ended up leaving Austin and going to school actually at the Georgetown University School of Foreign Service. And I don't know if I thought I was going to be a diplomat or what exactly the thinking was at that time. But like a lot of graduates out of the School of Foreign Service, I took the path of least resistance, which was to go to law school. And so I spent 3 years in Charlottesville, Virginia. I loved every second of law school. It was just a great experience. But what they don't really tell you is the fun that you have in law school does not translate into an equal amount of fun being an attorney. And so I came back to Austin. I was working at a big Houston-based oil and gas firm. I was actually doing corporate transactions on sort of the technology side. And it was not right for me. A lot of times when I'm on panels, I'll introduce myself as a recovering attorney. And that very much summarizes who I am. It was not a fulfilling experience for me. I didn't feel like I did anything that mattered. And I found myself pulled into the family business. And sometime in late 2009, I made the decision to make this huge pivot in my career. And while there's been ups and downs along the way, I look back on that as one of the best decisions I've ever made. And I'm thankful to be doing what I'm doing today.
Well, that's interesting. I want to hear more about why you think that is one of the best decisions. Before we talk about that real quickly, is attorneys are notoriously poor business people. I don't know if you believe that to be true or not, but I know that a lot of times that they struggle on the business side. They're brilliant at what they do, but they struggle on the business side. But you decided to make the transition into the business side. And you recently won Best CEO of the Year award. So no doubt you made the transition not just into the family business, but you did it exceedingly well and have been recognized for that. Talk a little bit about the transition and what was in your mind going from, like you said, being kind of a unsatisfied lawyer to being into the family business.
Well, I think that the most important thing for me when I look back on that decision was finding something that I really felt mattered, and I didn't feel like what I was doing as an attorney mattered. I felt like I was essentially a transaction cost. a fairly expensive transaction cost, especially given the level of knowledge I had at that time. I mean, being relatively junior on the totem pole, I was an awfully expensive cost to companies that were essentially, doing their Series B or merging with another organization. And it didn't really feel like what I did much good for the world. And I know that sounds really altruistic, but it was tough when I got done with the deal and the money changed hands and the stock got issued. That's where things kind of stopped for me. I didn't get to see what happened after that. And I didn't get to see what the end result was as these two companies, came together as one, or as this startup raised their Series A. And so when I looked to the restaurant business, one of the things I knew was true because I'd been around it all my life was that when we serve a pancake to a 6-year-old girl on her birthday, that's absolutely making her day. And it doesn't seem like the biggest, most remarkable thing in the world. It's not organizing all the world's data. It's not Google's mission. But being able to see the smile on her face, or a family enjoying a meal together, I mean, that actually feels like it matters. Likewise, what we do, and a lot of what our culture is at Kirby Lane, is an outgrowth of not particularly enjoying the culture of being a law firm. I felt in a lot of ways like I was a commodity, and I think I probably was. I could have been replaced very easily with someone else who had the same education and same credentials, and it was really 6 1/2 dozen to the law firm as to who was actually doing this transactional work for them. And when I came into the business, into the family business, it was really, really important to me that we not commoditize our team members, that each person has their own story and their own unique set of skills, and that we capitalize on that. And going back to your setup on this, which was lawyers are notoriously bad business people, I don't disagree with that. And I think part of the reason lawyers are notoriously bad business people is they work so darn hard and are generally not very happy. And it's hard to instill a great culture if you don't have time to work on the business as opposed to in the business.
Tell me a little bit about Kirby Lane. Tell me a little bit about when it started. There's a lot of nuances around restaurants, but also family businesses, and you guys have kind of done both. But Kirby Lane has a special story. Share that with me.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's a really interesting story. My folks, as I mentioned earlier, they started the business in 1980. It predates me by 5 or 6 months, which I've always said leads me to the conclusion that I was probably not a planned pregnancy, because I don't think you open up a restaurant and then have a baby immediately thereafter. But it's a really interesting story, and one day I've always said I'll write the book on it, and it'll be an interesting story for any reader out there. My folks start this business together. They have a child together, but their marriage doesn't work, and it didn't really ever work. Within a couple years of the organization starting and having early success, I mean, their marriage was done. And so as a kid, I never really questioned or thought about what a strange circumstance that was. Looking back on it, of course, it's bizarre. I mean, they have 2 business partners who are ex-spouses who don't even particularly like each other very much. It was a really, really odd thing, but I think that they made the decision that they had this business and they had 2 children to support, and to try to do something else, to take that risk, was going to jeopardize their ability to provide for my brother and me. And so they stuck with it. And sure enough, as they stuck with it, they ended up actually building something that developed into what's today an Austin institution. It's a beloved brand in Austin. We are routinely recognized as the most uniquely Austin business, and we have a lot a lot of people turn to Kirby Lane as the first place they go when they come into town, and the last place they go before they leave. And it's just been this really interesting story that was formed out of unusual circumstances, to say the least.
Well, that's absolutely true. The people that live in Austin, and I've lived in Austin and I'm there all the time, Kirby Lane is one of my favorite places, and people that have not been to Austin that go absolutely need to go visit Kirby Lane. In fact, a couple years ago, I don't know if it was ESPN Game Day or what it was, but ESPN came to town and they called you because they wanted to set up and do the show from one of your restaurants. Tell me a little bit about that.
It was before the UT Notre Dame game. I think it was last year, actually, which was a big game. I mean, both teams were ranked, and they reached out to us, and we actually thought it was a prank at first. We're like, surely ESPN doesn't really want to come and film game day from the dining room of our restaurant, but sure enough, they did, and it was a ton of fun. It was that's one of the cooler experiences I've had since being in this business, is just seeing what those guys were doing. They had a guy that ate more than he should have. But it was a ton of fun, and it made us, I think our PR people ran a study and said that we got something like $180,000 worth of advertising, the equivalent of $180,000 worth of advertising from the performance that they did. But more than anything else, I mean, it was just great for the team. It was the team members at that location and at all locations were frankly just super excited, and it made them have a real sense of pride in who they work for and what we're doing, and it was a lot of fun.
One of the things I want to pull back on what you started about, and I didn't want to skip over that very important thread of while you were practicing law, you just didn't have this fulfillment of like what you were doing was truly making a difference. And when you made the transition from what you were doing to what you're doing now at Kirby Lane, it was one of the most important decisions you had ever made. And so someone that's listening to this, I'm sure a lot of people can relate with that. They may be sitting in jobs or situations where they feel like what they're doing isn't fulfilling and isn't rewarding, and they wonder where things maybe went wrong or how they could have made a different decision. And so they may think, well, yeah, I don't have a family business I can go step into, but I don't think that was what probably forced you to make that decision. Talk a little bit about what advice you would give to somebody that maybe is in that situation, and how it was the best decision you had ever made because you stepped into something that was more fulfilling.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a heavy question. And I mean, I think as human beings, we are programmed to be risk averse, and jumping ship or changing course is a frightening thing. And I think in my case, I think I was helped along by the fact that I was so unhappy doing what I was doing. I mean, I was working like a dog and didn't enjoy it. And I saw that there was this opportunity to go do something else. And it was certainly scary. I mean, it was scary to leave the known and go into the unknown. But I was so unhappy doing what I was doing that I was able to find the courage to jump, frankly. I mean, I had to just one day jump. And looking back on it now, I've often said, and Kirk, you may have heard me say this, if I knew then what I know now, I frankly might have been too scared to make the leap, because I did step into a situation that required some cleanup and some fixing, and I didn't have a mentor along the way, and I didn't frankly know anything about running a business when I first came into this business. And so a lot of my early years with the organization was just figuring it out and being willing to learn from mistakes and knowing that I was going to make mistakes. I mean, I still make mistakes all the time, but being able to learn from that. I think there's a tendency to sometimes sit back and look at how life is dictating what happens to you as opposed to you dictating what happens in your life. And at some point, coming to terms with the fact that, I actually do have the power and I have the ability to do something different, to change my course in a way that's going to make me happier and more fulfilled, and not simply sit back and be for lack of a better term, a victim to the circumstances around you. And I needed that little push, and I took the leap, and it's been a great decision.
Well, Mason, I really appreciate you sharing that. There's a lot of truth in that. I think that a lot of times we just kind of let the emotions of the situation consume us, and unintentionally, or maybe it is intentionally, I don't know, but we become victims. And like I said, having the trust and the faith and belief to kind of believe in yourself to step forward and do that. I really appreciate you sharing that. I know people that are listening will appreciate it, and it will really ring true for them. Let's shift gears a little bit and just talk about Kirby Lane. You started in 1980. I don't know what the normal life expectancy is of a restaurant, but I would think that you guys have long outlived that. Why do you think that is? What do you think is for that success? And it's not just keeping the doors open, but it's really thriving in what is an area that has a lot of really great restaurants.
Yeah, and that's a tough question. It's something I think about a lot, is how do we continue to be relevant, especially in the last 5 years where Austin has become just such a foodie city. How do we, as this older established brand, how do we continue to be relevant? And I don't have a short, concise, silver bullet of an answer, but I think that there's a couple of key ingredients that have allowed us to sustain as long as we have. The first is simply culture and how we treat our people, and this is something that was instilled in the organization from early days with my parents. It's a sad story, but I have a memory from when I was probably 5 or 6 years old. It would have been the mid 80s. It's when the AIDS epidemic was really at its worst, and we had a team member who had AIDS, and he was dying from AIDS. His family had disowned him because he was gay, and while he didn't have a biological family that was going to be there for them, he did have a work family in the sense that my parents, they were there. I mean, I remember it was around Christmas time because my brother and I were making basically homemade Christmas ornaments and out of construction paper and glue, and we were putting together stuff to decorate this guy's hospital room. But the fact that my parents were there for him when his own family wasn't, I mean, to me, that's such a metaphor for how they cared deeply about our team and about the people that make the organization what it is. And ultimately, I don't think that you can be a successful restaurant in Austin, or perhaps more generally a successful business, if your team doesn't believe in you. You've got to have ambassadors for the brand, and if the team doesn't believe in it, it's really hard for the community around you to believe in it. And so I think that culture, that culture of compassion for our team is something that is very much true today. But the foundation was laid years and years and years ago.
I appreciate you sharing that story. That is a sad story, but a very powerful story, and really the foundation of why I even started doing this podcast, and the reason it's called For You Leaders is it's kind of a play on words a little bit, but it is really, there's leaders that are for you, and there's leaders that are for themselves, and there's leaders that are against you. But those leaders that are for you are the ones that care more about what they can put in than what they can take out. And I've been given a very special and unique gift to work alongside so many leaders and so many organizations, and have seen the power of what you just described unlock something inside people and inside businesses that really have nothing to do with a balance sheet or profit and loss statement or anything else like that, and really redefine what success looks like. You talk more about treating people like people first, and employees or team members second, and I think that's a great representation of what your parents did for that individual, what they did for you as kids, and what is now getting paid for on a daily basis.
Well, that's something that is near and dear to me and to this organization. And I think I've talked to you at some point in the past, but it's worth talking a little bit about now, we've, as an organization, made a huge shift in the last, I guess it's 4 years now, to something called open book management, which has been just profoundly impactful, not just on the bottom line, but on the culture of the organization and the quality of team member that we're able to generate. And with open book management, what we've done is, it's a lot like what it sounds, in the sense that we open up our books and there's really nothing other than salary data that's hidden. And we teach anybody who wants it financial literacy, starting at the very basic all the way up through understanding EBITA. And with our team, it's to me just such a satisfying thing, seeing a group of people, many of whom didn't get to go to college, many of whom may not have even graduated from high school, but who, through the training we provide and through the hard work they do on their own, have become these financially literate, savvy business people who, well, yes, they might be bussing tables. They also understand how their actions and the actions of the team members around them drive and impact the P&L and how that flows to EBITDA. And ultimately, our team is aligned around an EBITDA goal because we have a profit share that's in place company-wide for anybody who chooses to participate. There's a profit share in place if we hit our EBITDA goals. And so, to me, I recognize that most of our team isn't going to make a career at Kirby Lane. And I'm okay with that. I'd love for people to have this be their career. And for some people, that's the path they've chosen. But for a lot of people, they're moving on to other jobs and other companies and doing things on their own. And if what we can do is build a better corporate citizen in their time here with us, to where when they're interviewing at their next job, they're able to speak more competently about financials than the person interviewing them is, to me, that's why you do it. That's really making a difference for somebody and giving them skills that they'll have for the rest of their lives.
Well, that thread of doing something that really matters and makes a difference is showing up in all your conversations and all your examples here. I absolutely love this. One of the first times we met was at your office. It was at a YPO event, and I was just really impressed with, the numbers were all there for everybody to see on whiteboards around. It was at the corporate offices, and I've seen, been in the restaurants, and I've seen where you guys track those and do that. For someone that's listening, talk a little bit about what caused you to make that decision to move in that direction.
I would be lying if I said I didn't have to be pushed. We had someone in our organization, and his name's actually Michael Jackson, which is we all get a laugh out of that. But Michael had read Jack Stack's book called The Great Game of Business, and open book management originates actually in manufacturing. The founder of it is a guy named Jack Stack, who he's a fascinating character in and of himself. But Michael had read his book and approached me about it and said, this is something that companies that we know and admire. The one that really comes to mind for me is Zingerman's Delicatessen in Ann Arbor, Michigan. So these are companies that we know and admire. They're doing this, and it's making a big difference. I think it's something that we at Kirby Lane should consider. And at first, I looked at Michael and I was like, I like it in theory, but we're in the restaurant business. We're in a business where we have tight margins, and we have a sometimes apathetic workforce. I don't know that it's going to work for us. And I'd be the first to admit that I was a real skeptic at first. But I read the book at Michael's urging, and he and I continued to talk about it. And we eventually got to the point where it's like, yeah, let's just try it. Let's see what happens. And it was a huge, huge shift for our organization. I mean, and it wasn't like we waved the magic wand and on Monday we weren't open book management, and on Tuesday all of a sudden things were functioning at a high level. I mean, there was a lot of work that went into it, and I mean, I saw grown men crying as we tried to implement this, because it was like drinking from a fire hose at first. If you didn't know how to calculate gross margin, or if you didn't know really how to convert a fraction into a percentage, which is something that we had to go back and teach, being asked to own lines on the P&L and forecast out what your line's costs are going to be a fiscal period in advance or even a year in advance. I mean, that's heavy lifting. But I'm so thankful that Michael pushed me. And I'm so thankful that I had someone in our organization who believed not just in open book management, but in our organization. And he knew that we had it within us to do it. And while it was tough to get up to speed, the impact that it's made on our performance is absolutely phenomenal. This year, 2017, we've actually seen, for the first time since I've been with the organization, we've seen a downtick in sales. And that's something that's a little scary in and of itself. I think if we weren't doing open book management, we wouldn't be able to maintain the profitability that we're maintaining this year. I mean, we've had a I think this year we'll finish 4% down versus last year, sales-wise, but our profitability is going to be just as good as it was last year. And this is talking in dollar terms, not percentage terms. And I attribute that to the fact that we have a workforce of 600 to 700 some odd team members who are paying attention to all the little things. And the fact that they're paying attention has allowed us to maintain profitability, which I'm really, really thrilled about.
I'm sure there was a time, especially if you were a little bit skeptical in the beginning, where it would have been real easy for you to gather the information to support the perception that you wanted to have of saying, like, hey, this isn't working. I told you we're a restaurant. I told you that, that this is just too heavy, for us to be trying to get to implement. Let's just go back to the way we were. What was it that caused you to stay the course?
I mean, I think part of it is my leadership style. I'm not. I mean, you know me well enough to know this. I'm not dictatorial. I don't unilaterally make decisions. I've made enough mistakes to know that I don't always have the right answers. And so with this decision, it was one where I really wanted to hear inputs and hear the arguments. And we even broadened this discussion from just me and Michael, and brought in other people and talked about what this could do. And we actually went and did some classrooms as well. I mean, we went to Springfield, Missouri, because I wanted to see what it was all about. I wanted to see if in fact this was this thing that would have the impact on the organization that I was told that it would. And sure enough, I mean, we flew up to Springfield, Missouri. We did a workshop up there with the Great Game of Business folks. And I mean, to see these blue collar factory worker types talking about their company's balance sheet and understanding just these financial concepts that most ordinary workers aren't going to have an understanding of whatsoever. I think when we saw that, it was like, okay, yeah, there really is something to this. This really is the direction we should go. And culturally, it makes sense too. I mean, one of the themes that's we've heard over and over again during this conversation is this idea of, we really care about our people. We want to make them better. And this was a key ingredient to that.
The Great Game of Business is one of my favorite books. Anybody that's listening that hasn't read that, I would strongly encourage you. And I think that the reason I'm drilling down on some of these things is because I've seen significant shifts or transitions inside of organizations that are making these kind of transitions, that are trying to get into the hands of the people that are actually on the front lines, that are doing the work, that understand the work, that understand where the efficiencies and inefficiencies are, and empowering them and spending the time to educate them and do that is well worth it. But it takes time. I've seen too many times where people quit too early because it got hard, and there's that's why I'm push you a little bit on that because I think that it's really helpful for people listening to hear that it wasn't an overnight thing, that you had to stay uniquely curious, that you had to invite people into the conversation, that there's probably been ups and downs along the way, but it's in the end, you attribute it to one of the reasons that you guys have been able to be so successful.
Yeah, no doubt about that. The other piece I would add, and just as you were talking, I thought a little bit about this. Our workforce is heavily millennial, and while not all organizations have a predominantly millennial workforce today, they will within the next 5 to 10 years. And technically, I actually think I'm technically a millennial, or if I'm not technically a millennial, I missed it by like 4 days. And with that demographic, the why really matters. Why are we doing what we're doing? What is the reasoning for XYZ decision? How do I make an impact on the organization? And with our workforce being predominantly millennials, this really works well with, I think, what are some of their expectations when it comes to work and it comes to their careers. And so I think there's some good synergies there as well.
Someone could say, "Oh, no, we're a high tech company. We're that kind of stuff doesn't really work for us." So they could say, "Hey, I'm a restaurant. This we've got this kind of workforce." And you can always gather the data, like I said, to support whatever perception you'd like to have. However, the truth of the matter is how you treat people, and then spending the time and caring enough to not educate them just for your own purposes there at Kirby Lane, but the story you told about, like if they, maybe it's a college student that is going to go on and work in another corporate type of environment, but you make them a better citizen heading into that next opportunity. That transcends any industry, any kind of work whatsoever. People, and I do agree with you, the millennials, it is a heavy reason they want to know why, but I think it's true of almost every human being. They want to know that they're making a difference. They want that kind of that search for significance. Now, maybe they've given up on it and lost hope a little bit, where maybe the millennials have not. But it's just so important, so subtle, and we sometimes just quit before we get to the finish line on this stuff.
Sure, yeah.
When was the first time, kind of your first recollection of really knowing that you were called to be a leader?
That's a tough question for me to answer because it requires that I talk about me, and I don't love talking about me. I was always a really shy kid growing up. I didn't have a ton of self-confidence, and I don't know why that is. I was always very shy and reserved. And while academically I did well, I didn't necessarily feel like I was anything all that special or different. And maybe I'm not. I don't know. But there was some time in high school, and I don't know when this was, but where this shift occurred, where I went from really being focused on school and focused on getting good grades to saying, okay, well, I want to do something more. And so I got involved with a ton of stuff at that point. Prior to that point, it had always been sports. It had been baseball and basketball. And while I still loved those things, I decided I would make a shift away from that and go outside of really what I'd always known and outside of my comfort zone. And so I started doing things like debate. I got to where I was pretty good at debate. I started doing things that were totally outside of my comfort zone as a relatively shy introvert, like theater. I remember I was actually in a play my senior year of high school. And I don't know if I would say that was when I felt like I was called to be a leader, but that was when I realized that I was able to push myself beyond what was normal and comfortable. I think that's been an important quality for really my business career as well, is being able to step outside of what feels safe.
Well, it's obvious when you made the transition from your legal career into doing what you're doing now, going from what was a traditional way of running the business to doing open book management, as well as now kind of reinventing. So there's definitely, I don't think I'm being convenient there, a theme that has pulled through there for sure, at least in the conversations we're having.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Talk a little bit about family. I know I got a chance to recently meet your wife, and she is a really, really neat lady and thinks the world of you. I know that as CEOs and people that are in executive positions, there's kind of constant discussion or thought of prioritization around family and work. And I know that you guys actually work together. Talk a little bit about how you think about balancing family and work, and especially when it's a family business.
Yeah, that's a great question, and you're correct. Christina is fantastic. I really did better than I should have, quite honestly. And she actually came into the business, I think, 3 years ago now. And she runs our accounting department. She does a fantastic job. I mean, she's done a really, really good job, actually, in the sense that I don't have to worry about that department anymore because she's in charge of it. And she's made some really smart hires. But we actually sometimes get ourselves into trouble in the sense that we'll be out on a date and we'll start talking about the business. And it's like, well, no. We really, let's try to have our time be our time and talk about our travel plans or what we're reading or anything other than where we spend the majority of time all day, which is the business. And so finding a way to separate, really being intentional about separating, I think is very important, because while work is a super important part of my life, and I'm certainly passionate about what I do, it's important to have other things. And so we really have to make that conscious effort. I think the other piece that you'd asked about, and I think this is important too, is, and I am terrible at this, and I wish I wasn't terrible at this, but actually disconnecting during the time when I'm supposed to be disconnecting. So for instance, we just took a trip to Italy, where I'd never been to before, and Christina did a great job planning it. But I found myself dragged into conference calls and stuck on email, and it really kind of left a real sour note in the sense that was my quality time with Christina, and I allowed work to slip into it. And that wasn't fair to her, and it wasn't fair to me, and I shouldn't have allowed that to happen. And so with whatever upcoming trip we have, I'm going to make a real conscious effort not to do that, because I think if I can come back refreshed and not thinking about work, it'll make me ultimately more effective at work.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. I think that's a lot of things that all of us struggle with. You said one of the things earlier when we were just talking about is just learning from your mistakes and growing from those. You know, if you had to do it over again, how would you plan for that so you didn't feel like you needed to be on conference calls or emails? And I'm listening carefully because I need to learn from you too.
Well, I wish I knew the secret. I read an article in the Times recently where it was the best out of office messages for when you're on vacation, and then someone would put up, I'm in a remote area, I'm not checking email, but. And then in parentheses, actually, we all know that I'm checking emails, so just try to be short with your question. But then I saw another one, which I thought was just perfect, which was an out of office that said something along the lines of, I'm on vacation, I'm not checking email during my vacation, and I'm not going to check any old emails when I get back either, because that's antithetical to the whole vacation experience. And so this whole idea of not only ignoring email when you're gone, but putting everybody on notice that if you sent it in the last 2 weeks, I'm going to delete it and you're not going to get. And so I don't know if I quite have the gumption to do that, but theoretically I would love to.
Well, that's as you might imagine, work with the number of CEOs that I work with, I've gotten to see some really good out of office responses, and I've kind of collected them and kind of combined the best of what I think is the best. I can share that with you sometime. Yeah, that's one that I think Gabe Kretschek of Casasa. He's actually been on this podcast. He says that and does that, where he's like, not only I'm not checking, and when I get back, I'm deleting everything. So if it's important, connect with me when I get back.
Well, Gabe's a guy I really like and respect, and I those feelings are only accentuated knowing that. And so I think that maybe I'm going to have to take a page out of his book for this next vacation.
Yeah, no, I definitely did. So it was good. Well, good. Tell me about what's your favorite restaurant besides Kirby Lane?
There's so many people that do a good job. Locally, I think there's a concept called Jack Allen's Kitchen, which, they just get it right. And they provide just high quality food at a reasonable price, which I think is a dying art. There's so much overpriced stuff out there, and Jack's does it great. Another restaurant, which I just think the world of, is True Food Kitchen, which is a national brand at this point. What they're doing with innovative, healthy dishes, I think it's just a brilliant concept. And then another restaurant that actually is local, but now has, I think they're pushing 100 locations nationally, and they went public a couple of years ago, is Chuy's, just the Tex-Mex chain out of Austin. They talk about a cool brand where you can go to a Chuy's in Austin, Texas, or the suburbs of Washington, D.C., and you're going to get this funky Austin experience that's unlike any other. They really get it right.
Yeah, they do. I really like Chuy's. You talked about Zingerman's a little bit earlier. As we're sitting here having this conversation, I'm sitting in Ann Arbor, Michigan. So,
oh, no kidding.
I think I know where I'll go to dinner tonight.
So, do you know the Zingerman's folks?
I don't actually. The company I'm working with here knows them fairly well. So,
okay. What Ari and Paul have done over there, I think they've had more of an influence on me than just about anybody else. They are just an incredible brand.
They wrote a book, didn't they?
Yeah.
What was the name?
So Ari, actually, it's sitting here on my bookshelf. Ari, who's one of the founders over there, he's written a series of leadership books, and I think it's a 4 or 5 volume series at this point, and our people have read many of them. There's one on building a better leader. There's one on building a great business. There's one on managing yourself, which I think is an important piece. He's done. That whole team, they've done a great job.
Yeah. That's what Doug Song, who's the CEO of Duo here in Ann Arbor, Michigan, really successful business here, speaks very highly of him. He has those same books sitting on his bookshelf.
Well, and talk about servant leadership. If you go into the Zingerman's Roadhouse for dinner this evening, which I highly recommend, chances are really good that you're going to see Ari on the floor bussing tables and refilling waters. That's what he does. To have somebody who's such a successful, such a well-respected CEO out on the floor on a Tuesday evening doing that, that really speaks to the ultimate in servant leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to be respectful of your time, and I know we're getting close to time on here, but a couple things. One is I just want to tell you thank you. You truly embodied the reason that I'm doing this podcast, and like I said, it's called For You Leaders Podcast, and the concept of that For You are those leaders that truly do care about others, and it doesn't mean just giving people everything they want and being soft. It really does mean truly caring about their well-being personally as well as professionally. And the stories that you've shared here today about yourself as well as your parents, your family, and everything else it really enriches this podcast. So I appreciate you taking time to do that. And so I want to stop for a second there and just say thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. It's been quite the honor to come and visit with you, and especially knowing the caliber and the quality of people that you've had on your podcast. It really is. It puts me in pretty phenomenal company.
Well, thank you. I'm very, very lucky and very blessed to be able to work with and be close to people like yourself. So one last question here, and I could keep on going, and I'm sure I'm going to ask you to get on this podcast again, but and you kind of shared some things throughout this podcast that people can take, but I want to be specific about asking you, what is something that you think any business leader, any leader for that matter, could learn from the restaurant business?
Well, I've always said that everybody should wait tables at some point in their life, just for the social skills that it forces upon you. Again, as a shy person, and Christina, my wife, is the same way. Both of us look back on our our time waiting tables is really critical time in our lives, in the sense that it brought us out of our shells and it forced us to be salespeople at a young age. And I mean, I attribute a lot of my social skills, or some would argue lack thereof, to the time I've spent basically being a salesperson. And so that's something that if you have kids, put them in the restaurant industry early on so that they can experience it. I think that's important. Beyond that, I mean, restaurants are really, really tough business. It's not an easy industry. And I think that the difference between the successful operators and the not successful operators is a laser focus on the little things. I mean, there's the expression, don't sweat the small stuff. Well, we sweat the small stuff big time, because the difference between a good year and a bad year, it's not one big strategic decision or rolling out a strategic plan. It's not that. It's getting the 100,000 little things right, or a majority of the 100,000 little things right. And in this industry, it's something where if you don't get those things right, I sometimes analogize to an aircraft carrier, in the sense that it takes a long time for an aircraft carrier to stop and make a turn. And with our industry, if you get it going in the right direction, it's going to take a second for it to course correct to the wrong direction. And similarly, if you have it going in the wrong direction, it's going to take a lot of effort and a lot of energy to course correct to go in the right direction. And so I think with this business, just the laser focus on all the little things, and I think that's something that anybody in any business could benefit from.
Absolutely. And I think all the more reason for your decision to move towards open book management, because it puts the power in the hands of the people that can actually see something and do something about it before, like you said, the aircraft carrier has gone way off course. They see it, they see more, and they see before you can, oftentimes. So that's really powerful. Well, I've really enjoyed this. Thank you very much, Mason, for your time, and I definitely want to have you back on again. Thank you, Kirk. I appreciate it. It's really nice catching up.
What will you take away from today's podcast? What were the things that made you stop and think for a moment? Were there some things that you think you can apply, some of the concepts that Mason shared, and apply those in your business? I really hope that you see and believe that some of the concepts around open book management that Mason shared can and will work in your business. As Mason talked about a little earlier, when the concept was first brought to him, he dismissed it, or at least had some serious reservations about it. And as he went on to share and committed and leaned into that process, the difference it's made for not only him, but many, many people who have worked for a short time or a long time at Kirby Lane. Remember that business is more than just what your business does. I really appreciated Mason and how he shared that. It's really what you accomplish through your business. Remember Mason's stories about how Kirby Lane does more than just serve food, and they've always been that way. If you're in Austin and you have not experienced Kirby Lane, I would strongly encourage you to go in there and see what it's all about. It's a great, great place. Also, I want to know what you think about this For You Leaders podcast. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Do you have suggestions of another guest we should have on? Any and all suggestions we are open to and would love to hear from you. If you would please go to foryouleaders.com. Once again, that's foryouleaders.com. And leave any recommendations or suggestions. Sure would appreciate it. Have a blessed day.